Thanks very much for inviting me, Sue, and MIT community. I do have a few friends there. Um, I'm just gonna. You had a brief bio on me already, so I'll just say a couple of perhaps relevant things. So I was born in New York City, but I grew up in Colorado, and my parents were both immigrants. My father was an Iraqi Jew, and my mother is from Jamaica. Um, and grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, which started off as a pretty small town where I was essentially the only black student in school, and we were Jewish. That was also pretty rare there. And then I went to Stanford as an undergrad and back to Colorado at CU Boulder for my PhD. And I've been at Berkeley ever since. And I thought I'd start by just being a little personal about some of the issues of DEI in academia that I encountered. Let me say at the outset that I encountered very little overt racism from academics. I have certainly seen it in other settings, but not typically in academia. And there's something that's true for everyone, basically. And postdocs are certainly, I think, heavily influenced by what is called imposter syndrome. I suspect you all know what that is, but basically you're never sure that you're qualified or you are the best or you belong there or whatever. And those feelings, I think, are true for everyone. I've had the opportunity to speak with extremely highly regarded scientists, and they're like, oh, you know, I don't know if I did this right or this other guy's better or whatever. So I think it's just part of the academic setting. So you can't ignore imposter syndrome, but just remind yourself all the time that everybody else has it too. Some people hide it a lot better than others, but pretty much everybody has it. It's stronger, I think, though, for women in science and folks of color in general. Anyone who is not well represented in academia will have an even stronger sense of imposter syndrome. And along with imposter syndrome comes stereotype threat, which is related, but that can impact your work. It can impact when you're going for interviews. It can impact talks you give. If you don't know what that is, it's the feeling that you represent your underrepresented group, and that people will judge that whole group by your performance, and you add that to imposter syndrome, and you get something that makes you kind of nervous and sometimes impacts your performance. And I think that the best solution to stereotype threat and imposter syndrome is just to be aware of them, know that they're there, and just try to remember that those are essentially psychological states that are just going to be there, and you need to sort of put them to the side, you know, have a really tough night the night before, whatever. but yeah, try not to let them actually impact you. And the final thing that I will talk about, and this is something I haven't talked about until recently, is the effect of affirmative action. So I think that I benefited substantially from affirmative action. And that means the imposter syndrome gets another wrinkle, in that you wonder whether you would have been there without that. And it also causes the majority population to think that you didn't really belong there, even more so than they might have otherwise, or to wonder, you know, who you replaced. There's a lot of negative sort of internal things that happen with affirmative action. I'm a very strong advocate of it. I came of age right when that was coming in place. I've seen the folks who benefited from it go much further than they would have been able to otherwise. I've seen, you know, highly qualified people got their chance. In California here, we have a proposition on the ballot now, I think due to the current moment of racial consciousness, that would repeal the absolute ban on affirmative action in California. But I'm thinking ahead to hoping that passes, but then remembering that there are these other factors that come into play when that does come into play. But let me reiterate, I'm a very strong advocate of it for the reason that underrepresented populations were, very explicitly excluded for a long time. And even after they weren't explicitly excluded, they're implicitly damaged by the systemic forces that were excluding them before. So affirmative action is one way to try to overcome some of those. It certainly doesn't overcome them all, but it's important. But it's also important for both the recipients and the onlookers to remember that that's a complicated topic. All right. So moving to the more abstract aspects, I guess. Let me just say a little bit about the faculty statistics in the UC system and in Berkeley in particular. And I think I'm not only talking to scientists. Is that right, Pansu?
Yes, it's the whole postdoc community.
Right. Okay. So particularly in science, but even more generally, there are real issues, especially with faculty diversity. Faculty diversity is going to be the last thing to be corrected, and the reason is that faculties last a long time. So typical faculty member might be there for 30 years, so the turnover is slow, and faculty selection is done by the faculty, and so you have the current cohort is making the selection, and that's already 30 or 40 years behind where we are now, and so that's an issue. So just as by way of illustration, at the UC system, when affirmative action, before affirmative action, there were essentially no faculty of color and very few women, and in the sort of 70s and 80s, that began to be fixed a little bit. And then by the time the late 80s came around, the backlash against affirmative action had really kicked in. And so you look at our faculty statistics, they climb up to the late 80s, then they flattened out, amazingly flat through recessions, through Prop 209, through all kinds of stuff. The number of faculty of color was constant to within a pretty small percentage. And as a physicist, I would point out to the committees that I began working with that, when this happens in physics, you say to yourself, oh, there's some strong equilibrium force at work here, and this thing is quite resistant to attempts to change it, and what could that be? Who knows? But there it is, and so if we're going to change this, we are going to have to operate at a sort of deep systemic level and pay attention to whether efforts are actually working or not. And for me personally, there were two faculty of color, well, I should say two Black faculty members in the entire sciences at Berkeley when I came. One of them died after 12 years or so, and then I was the only one for the rest of my faculty career. Even through the time that I was Vice Chancellor for Equity and Inclusion, we couldn't manage to hire another Black faculty member in science. So that's kind of the level of difficulty one is looking at. Now there is a new Black faculty member at Berkeley in the Division of Physical Science, and she's in Earth and Planetary Science. That's great, but that's not that great. we really need to do a lot better than that. And in general, even in the social sciences, the percentage of faculty of color is less than 15%. Women have been doing somewhat better, but it's mostly white women. That percentage has gone up to now 40% of the faculty at UC, and so that's progress. And in another decade or so, maybe it will even reach parity with the pool. We'll see. Okay, so those are sort of fundamental issues of number. Let me talk a little bit more about what happens if you become a faculty member. My department was incredibly supportive. They didn't have to do anything that they did. They were interested in seeing if I was Berkeley faculty quality. They gave me every chance to to prove it. Then they were pretty supportive thereafter. More generally, though, the kinds of issues one runs into in academia are one, insider knowledge. So as I said, the faculty have been there a long time, or at least some of it has. They have ways of doing things. They may or may not clue you into those things. It's very important when you get hired as a faculty member to figure out one or two faculty members who are there, preferably one senior one, if there's such a person who's friendly, to clue you in about how that department's culture works and what they really look at, and you know, what they expect and what upsets them and so on. Those cultures are very department specific, but it's essential. And the other thing that we tried to do at Berkeley here is form a possibility for faculty of color who are in different departments to have some way of meeting each other, forming a network, so that they can, so, you know, you can't always figure stuff out in your department, but you may be able to talk to people in other departments where you're not one of the players and find more things out. So forming that kind of network, but basically become informed about the culture of your institution, and in particular of your department, is absolutely key. Now, here at Berkeley, we haven't had any problem with the tenure rate, for example. The rate of tenure of underrepresented faculty is at least as good as for the majority faculty. So that's not an issue, except sometimes. So not very little in the, well, there are very little statistics in the science, but we don't see that problem there. But in the social sciences in particular, people today, young people in the social sciences, have new ways of attacking the problems, and they attack new problems. And sometimes the older faculty are just not on board with that. There's a real rub between folks who like to do things, qualitative research versus quantitative research, for example. And that does sometimes break down along these lines that we're discussing. So when that happens, again, you need faculty allies. You need to understand what's going to get you on the downside of people who have the power to influence your advancement and so on. So it's trickier. It's definitely trickier in the social sciences and humanities than it is in the sciences. There's another thing that I discovered along the way, which is this, at least in the UC system, but I think it's generally true, scientists tend to advance faster than non-scientists, mostly because of the article-based sort of publishing and merit that one builds up versus book-based disciplines. And that, what happens there is, if you don't advance as quickly, you know, your integrated salary over your career ends up quite a bit lower. And also the advancement to full professor gets hung up for years with book-based disciplines, and that tends not to happen so much in the sciences. So that's something else to pay attention to if you're in a book-based field, is how do people treat that, and are there disparities related to that? And if your university has an office of faculty equity or an office of diversity, equity, inclusion, you should try to make contact with them and their materials to find out what actually goes on at your institution. And you know, related to that, let me say a little bit about reward systems. So both women and faculty of color are attractive to hire, partly because they will help with the issue of underrepresentation in those groups. But that also means that they'll be asked to do all kinds of service. And typically, they're into it. That's something they actually do want to do. And so they'll say yes to all these things. And their white male colleagues may just be concentrating on research. And then when it comes around to tenure or to advancement, you know, the question is, are you being appreciated for doing all that, or is that actually standing in your way? And the typical situation, unless it's been dealt with, is it's standing in your way. When the committees meet behind closed doors and they look at, is this person deserving of advancement, they don't give much weight to that service orientation unless the university has said very explicitly, we really care about this, you must give weight to that. And so getting policies around that in place is important. That's one of the things that I worked on quite a bit, is to get it explicitly stated and track whether people are paying attention or not. And you know, I'll have to say at this point, and I don't have the time to explain all of how this all came down and what it is and so on, but I will say that for the faculty at Berkeley, in the yearly expression of what I accomplished, there's a prominent place for what I accomplished in this arena of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's not compulsory at all that you have to have accomplished something there, but people began seeing it that way. And so lots of people have now jumped in. Maybe they don't really know what they're doing, but they definitely feel like they need to write something down and have done something. And so now it's almost kind of too much that we see everybody, you know, oh, everybody's working on this, you know, and so then you start to wonder whether the people who are really working on it are being valued appropriately. But anyway, I'd say that's a positive step forward. Similar to that is the merit system for departments. So almost everywhere has some kind of academic review every few years. And at places like Berkeley, it's a very big deal. Basically, the department spends about a year preparing for it and going through it. There's an internal review committee, and then there's a review committee of, you know, august people in that field who are brought in from the outside to look at overall materials, interview a lot of people, and make their own report. And another thing that I worked on hard that's in place here now is the examination of how the department is doing on the diversity, equity, and inclusion front as part of that review. And the committee that looks at the results of the review has a person on it who's looking at that. And the academic senate committee that works on those issues has a seat in that review committee, and so on. So there's a set of steps that mean at the end of the day that, yeah, the university takes it seriously, and yeah, the department's not doing anything. The provost writes them a letter and says, boy, you know, you look great on all these dimensions, but not on this one. And if we don't see progress, you know, well, you know, we've got a certain limited number of faculty positions, and, you know, you need to think about how you're going to get yours. So that's serious. That's what gets people's attention. And that only happens, I think, when there is written policy and active membership in the rooms where this actually comes down. Okay, I think that's almost all my time. The last thing I'll say is, as postdocs should try to plug into networks of postdocs and of faculty as much as you can and as soon as you can, because you can get the inside word a variety of ways. But if you don't plug into those networks, you will not know something you would have wished you knew. So I think that it's essential to figure out who you can network with and maintain those. And also, you know, as you become more senior, to share what you're learning with those coming up behind you. So I'm going to stop there because I suspect there's lots of fun questions we can have a discussion about.
Okay, thank you so much, Gibor, for this very nice talk. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. Before I take the floor and ask you my questions, I think I should first let other people speak. So if there's any question, please, you can just raise your hand, unmute yourself. I think you should be able to unmute yourself. I didn't forbid that. So the floor is open to questions. Unless no one has questions, I'll start asking.
Hi, sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand, but I'll ask a question. So
That's good.
you mentioned policy, like having policy from above that that um, cause the departments to actually do work on this. But I'm wondering, like, what does that policy actually look like? Like, is it? Yeah, specifically.
That's a very good question. And let me, so I usually give this talk or a talk like this with, PowerPoint, in which I have some of those things available. So I've got mine here. Let me, okay, so for example, in the strategic plan, I guess let me talk a little bit more. So while I was vice chancellor, I did a few things. I provided that every department must have an equity advisor in it. That must be a tenured professor who comes to meetings with the Division of Equity and Inclusion, and gets a lot of information that they can carry back to their department. They make sure that the searches go well. So this is all written down in terms of the equity advisors, for example. So, what are the duties of an equity advisor? They will come to these meetings. They will either serve on search committees or have a person on the search committee who they speak with to make sure that the search is equitable. After 2 or 3 years, we even managed to get the equity advisors actual checkoff power. So twice during the search process, the equity advisor has to click a box in the online search process, or it doesn't move forward. And one of those times is when the department has finalized its search plan. The equity advisor looks it over and says, okay, yeah, this has the things it needs to have in it. And then the second time is as the application time is closing, the equity advisor gets the information about the composition of the pool of applicants and says, yes, this is a sufficiently diverse pool of applicants, or no, it's not. The search needs to be held open and better efforts need to be made to get more diverse applicants for this search. I also asked that departments have a strategic plan on equity and inclusion. That plan is looked at during the academic program review. The equity advisor is responsible for making sure the department does it, not for doing it themselves, but just making sure the department does it with an informed effort. And then the policies also state that the university cares about this. One of the UC system was the genesis of the anti-affirmative action proposition. So it was actually a regent who was appointed by the governor at the time, who was also responsible for an anti-immigrant proposition. But one of the regents of the University of California first got the Board of Regents to pass a resolution against it, and then he ran a campaign in the state of California against it. And after a while, the Board of the Regents changed, and so now there's a Regents resolution that I helped come into being, and it states things like diversity of people of California has been a source of innovative ideas, creative accomplishments. Here's what diversity is. The core mission of the University of California is to serve the interests of the state of California. Its people are its greatest resource. It goes through a justification of why the university should be able to, make this effort part of its agenda. And it says that this is part of the definition of excellence for universities. And then the last sentence is, the university particularly acknowledges the acute need to remove barriers to the recruitment, retention, and advancement of talented students, faculty, and staff from historically excluded populations who are currently underrepresented. So that's from the regents. It's signed off by the presidents, by the chancellors, by the academic senates. Everybody is on board with that, and that provides the underlying justification for these efforts. And I think that's important as well, to have a statement like that. I don't know if I answered your question fully, but those things are all written down, and the mechanisms are put in place to make sure they keep getting paid attention to, so that they're not just words.
Thank you very much.
Other questions, please.
I wonder if I could perhaps follow on to that question. Thank you for being here. I actually just finished my PhD at Berkeley, so this has kind of an extra layer to it that I kind of have enjoyed hearing. So you mentioned that there's a statement about recruiting for students, faculty, and staff, but one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is postdoc recruiting and postdoc hiring. I wonder if that's something you've ever thought about in these same contexts.
Yes, I've thought about it, and certain committees have thought about it. And you're right, it often gets left out. There's the postdoc population is kind of between the cracks of the way people often think about it, even the way I used to think about it. We do have a sort of postdoc equity person, and we try to emphasize to departments that needs to be part of their strategic plan for equity and inclusion. But it's complicated in the sense that postdocs are hired a variety of ways. So when postdocs are hired by a PI on a particular grant to do a particular job, that's one thing. And then we have postdocs who are hired by, let's say, the Theoretical Astrophysics Center, which is a much broader sort of search. And my department has talked, we had a discussion about this about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Could we figure out a way to just have a sort of postdoc hiring strategy that was department wide? And that way you can get a much more diverse pool of applicants, and then figure out how to parse out the postdocs. We still haven't figured it out exactly how that can work, because of the various sources of funding and so on, but that it's absolutely worth paying attention. A few years ago, we noticed, someone noticed that we'd hired very few women postdocs in the previous 2 years, and so we met about that. It was like, and it was all individual decisions. People weren't thinking about what's the whole department doing, and that's why that happened. And as soon as that meeting was held, the situation was corrected. The next year, people said, well, okay, so who are you hiring? Who am I hiring? And we looked at, is bias or availability or whatever sneaking in here and creating what at the end is not a good situation. And if so, we need to work harder on it to make sure that doesn't happen. So part of it is to be organized about postdoc hiring, but I can say from experience that ain't so easy to really do, which just means you need to work on it harder, basically. And the university usually doesn't say anything about it, basically. And we have a postdoc office that finally started keeping track of it and then letting people know. Became part of the academic review process, what's been going on, and giving it visibility is part of the answer as well. Yeah, but not an easy solution there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. I see one hand raised. Laura?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I'm at work, so I tried to find a quiet spot here. Thank you for the talk. It was great. I was wondering, do you think that when it comes to diversity and equity, once we solve the recruitment problem, the rest of the problems will sort of peter out eventually, or departments should put a concerted effort in removing the following barriers, and which are the most important ones that you think should be addressed?
Well, I think the immediate question is, what's the climate in the department? So there's a concept of critical mass. And for the most part, well, in the social sciences and humanities, some departments have achieved critical mass for particular populations. That makes a big difference. Once you achieve critical mass in the faculty, then you have faculty members sitting at the table for whatever who bring this up, or bring up issues, or oh no, that's the way you used to do things, but that doesn't work for us anymore. So climate issues are, I would say that eventually they're solved by very diverse population within the department, but there's a long period of time in between where that's not true, and you have to be aware of them. So climate surveys are an important tool. They're hard to do at the departmental level because confidentiality is such a big issue, and so on. My department has done it. We had to engage the university's Division of Equity and Inclusion to actually run it, to preserve anonymity, and then they don't give us back the detailed results. They summarize it for us so that you can't tell who said what, or so they're careful about it. So that's not easy to do, but it's important if you can get it done, because the climate issues are then made explicit. Otherwise people say, people don't, that's not really a problem, or somebody's a whiner or whatever. So as vice chancellor, I ran several climate surveys at the campus level, and then we ran a UC system-wide climate survey with 450,000 people in it. And one of the really striking results from that one was we asked climate questions of each group, and then we asked each group what they thought the responses of other groups were going to be. And it was very, very clear-cut and illuminating, for example, that the African-American students, staff and faculty all were fairly unhappy, and their predicted response from the majority groups was 30 percentage points higher than the actual result. And when that came out, people sort of stood back and said, oh, I guess I actually don't get it. So that's helpful. But until you get critical mass, the people who are there are always feeling a little isolated, and the department culture isn't set by them, and so on. And so it remains an issue, I think, until you have real representation, and that only comes with numbers finally.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question. I'm sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand either, so.
This is a good way.
Yeah, so I was wondering how you calculate the bias in hiring. So for example, so how do you measure if a university has a bias in when they hire people? Do you look at the proportion of applicants, and then so yeah, I was just wondering how you do it.
The way it's wired in is there are reports available from the National Science Foundation and professional societies about the availability pool. So how many people are getting PhDs each year in this field, and so on. And so that defines what we call the applicant pool. And then, as I said earlier, the applicant pool is compared to the actual applicants. And if there's certain, let's say if 20% of this group, if the availability pool nationally is composed 20% of this group, and the number of applicants to this position is only 5% of that group, then we say you haven't really done a good job of tapping the whole available pool.
Okay.
And the fundamental justification for tapping the whole available pool is we're looking for the best people. You can't be sure that you found the best people if you didn't even look at half the pool.
Yeah.
So that's the argument there. So yeah, so there's actual data behind it. So there's data about the national availability pool, and then there's data about the applicant pool, and you compare them. The other thing that we do is we keep track historically of what's happened. So the problem with hiring at the faculty level is it's a very sort of small number statistics game, right? You hire one this year and maybe two the next year, or maybe none the next year and one the year after. And so who you hired, that was at the end of the day, that's the person that got hired. So was that a bias hire or not? Well, hard to say, once, but when the applicant pool is 40% women over a decade, and you didn't hire any of them, that's starting to look like bias. In fact, that is bias. It's like, really, all that time it was always, even though 40% of the pool looked like this, and so then you need the upper administration to take that seriously. They have to actually say, we've looked at this data and we think there's a major problem here. So and now then it got more complicated in California. So the law is you may not pay any attention whatsoever to gender, race, ethnicity, and so on. And so then it becomes a more obscure argument. It's like, it doesn't look like you're really tapping the availability pool. Also, the federal law is different from California law. That says you must tap the availability pool. So no, we don't think you should hire a woman because we don't care because that's not legal in California. But you're violating federal rules here, and we don't like that. We could lose all our federal grants. So you need to pay more attention to this issue. Okay. So that's how it works in practice. So bias. The other thing I want to say, so I say to audiences now, is systemic racism is becoming more sort of apparent. If we don't pay any attention to race or gender and so on, but there's this black student who had a SAT score that was lower than this white student and they were admitted, that's clearly bias. On the other hand, if the availability pool of black students is 15% and only 3% of them have been admitted, there's I don't see any evidence of bias there. And that is actually the legal situation if you look at rulings. And so that's another thing you're up against, basically. When people see bias and don't see bias, has a very interesting complexion to it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's a little faint for me.
Is that better?
Slightly. I'll listen closely.
So, hi, I'm a grad student in the Earth, Atmospheric and Planetary Sciences at MIT. And so I just wanted to hear your opinion on something. We've been having a lot of discussions on diversity statement when it comes to faculty hires. And so there's like two different sides of the argument. One side is that by including a diversity statement, we'll be able to see the commitment of the potential faculty to a more diverse and inclusive department, versus other people argue that having a diversity statement could be kind of like a cop-out, being like, oh, yes, we have a diversity statement, but then like it excuses from doing anything else. I was wondering what your opinions on diversity statement for faculty hires are.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. So I guess let me start by saying when one hires a faculty member, one is not hiring just a researcher. One is hiring somebody who you hope will teach well, who will bring along students, who will serve the other agendas of the university, and who will make the world a better place. That figure of merit, that way of looking at the merit of the applicants, has been a tough one in faculty hiring. People tend to concentrate on, especially at R1 universities, tend to concentrate on publication record and not much else. When I was hired at Berkeley, you know, they were pretty clear that, well, we hope you can teach well, but, you know, that's really not what we're looking at. That has changed. You know, that by now it's quite important to have a teaching statement. The diversity statement is like that as well. It's another aspect of faculty life and service, not for all faculty. So here's where I, you know, differ from some of my colleagues. I'm not sure that diversity statement should be required on an application. Somebody doesn't do anything in that area, they shouldn't say anything. You know, we can see that they didn't say anything, that's fine. And, you know, maybe they have other qualities that balance that out. But that should be one of the things that we're looking at, because the university, as I said earlier, has made it very clear that that's part of its agenda. And it is explained why. So I think diversity statements are a good thing. I don't think they're a good thing from people who don't really care about it. I'd rather they made a stronger case in another arena. The latter part of what you said was being discussed, which I probably won't remember exactly right though. In fact, maybe let me get you to repeat the second point you were making.
No, I was just saying, like, the two different sides of the argument as to why we should include or versus not include.
Yeah, what was the second side?
It was that it could be kind of like used as a cop-out, being like, oh, I included a diversity statement, like that's good enough, and then like not commit to do anything other than that.
Yes, that's one danger. Another danger is that the person writes a diversity statement with some help from their friends. You know, that sounds pretty good. I guess that's what you're saying. It's then they don't do anything, or they just really shouldn't be doing it because actually they don't understand the issues and it's not helpful. So I don't think everybody should do that. I don't think everybody should you know, be an editor of a professional journal. I don't think everybody should do anything in particular. You should look at the overall set of skills, talents, and efforts that the faculty member, prospective faculty member, is going to bring, and you should hire the person who most roundly fills out your needs. And diversity should be one of them. But yeah, you can't hire people just for that. And the other thing about diversity statements that we're actually explicit about here is what the person says they think about it is interesting, but not that weighty. What they have been doing about it up to now gets the main weight from the diversity statement. So what have they actually done? Have they started, you know, a program and run it? You know, that's high merit. Did they participate in a program? Well, you know, good. Did they think about it? Not that impressive. And so, like all other figures of merit, you know, the committee needs to look at, do they believe this person really will contribute in this arena? It's the same standard that is applied to the research. You know, they look at, oh, is this just their thesis over and over, or is their thesis advisor actually the brains behind all the work they're doing, and things of that sort. It's the same set of criteria. What the committee is trying to figure out is, what is the future potential of this person to contribute in as many ways as possible to this department. And the addition of diversity is one of the ways they could contribute, you know, is new in the last 20 years or so, but now it's here. And so, yes, that's one of them. But we tried to be very clear. You don't treat this any differently than you treat the other criteria of merit. You look for evidence of past accomplishment and potential of future accomplishment.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we have some still time left. Given today's audience, I would like to just ask one crucial question that probably will relate to pretty much everybody in the audience, and that is basically, as future mentors, PIs, faculty members, what would be your major advice or set of advice to postdocs to implement diversity, equity inclusion practices in their workspaces? This can be their departments, this can be their own small research group.
Well, of course, the answer to that is as varied as the audience, I'm sure. So, you know, that depends on who you are, what kind of work you do, what kind of people you work with. I think the general advice would be figure out whether it's playing much of a role in what you're doing, especially with your students or your employees or whatever it is. Check in with them is a good piece of advice. You know, but try to find out what the people you're trying to help actually think, what they think they need, whether they think they're getting it, what they would like to be getting that they're not getting. You know, I think you have to. It's a very sort of local and personal question. It's the general rule, though, should be, I think, you're there. You've reached some level, whatever level you're at, and there are folks below you who are trying to come up there too. And I think that it's very important for us to help those who are coming up behind us as much as we can. I really get upset when students ask faculty for letters, for example, and they just don't supply them, or they supply them really late, or they don't put much effort into them. I think it's part of your job as a faculty member, if you had students, to do everything you can to promote their careers. And it's an abrogation of responsibility to just, you know, blow it off, or even worse, you know, steal their credit or something. You know, around diversity, it's, you know, depending on who we're talking about and what's going on with them, there may be things you can do, or, you know, maybe you can just put them in touch with other folks who might be helpful in that aspect. Just, you know, be thinking about it. What can I do to bring this person along? And try to find out what they think, if you can.
Thank you, Gibor. Okay, so I guess we have still a few minutes for questions. I don't see any hands up, but maybe someone will speak if I...
So
yeah, go ahead, please.
Sorry. So I have another question. I hope you didn't mention it because I came late to your talk. So I'm sorry about this. I had something before. So I was wondering if it would be interesting, because so from what I read, what is interesting in diversity is that it brings a diversity of opinions and point of views. And I was wondering if for you, it would be interesting to have a diversity in terms of race, gender, but also in terms of socioeconomic status. And I was wondering what were your thoughts about what your thoughts were about this. And also, I'm not very familiar with the American system. And I was wondering if something was being done on this aspect.
Well, that's an arena where Berkeley is very proud. So we have a large percentage of students who are first generation students. Nobody in their family went to college before they did. And we have one of the largest percentages of students on Pell Grants and Cal Grants. So we have a large low-income first gen undergraduate population at Berkeley, and it's part of our pride to have that, and then there's a lot of stuff you need to do if you're going to support those students to get their degree successfully. You need to supply you know, the kind of social capital that they don't have because nobody they know ever went to college, and you know, and the financial aid they need, and so on and so forth, and to actually understand their situations. So a lot of those students, their family, you know, didn't want them to go to college because they want them to work and contribute to the family. They'll take their financial aid and they'll send it back home. Then they don't have any food, so we have food pantry. I mean, it's not a simple thing to properly bring along very, very poor students or students who have no experience in this arena. But it's worth doing because I think, you know, it's very clear education is the way up. from low socioeconomic status. And especially education at a good university is very helpful to those folks. If they can complete their degree, they're going to go out of that status and hopefully bring their family with them. So we think it's really important. You know, we're a public university, so private universities can make their own mind up about that. But I know a lot of the best private universities have that as one of their agendas. You know, they don't do it as much as Berkeley. In fact, when I was vice chancellor, you know, we always put up a slide that said, you know, we have more Pell Grant students at Berkeley than the entire Ivy League and Stanford combined. That was a bit of a cheat because we're also a much bigger university, but but it was a point. So yeah. Now on the other hand, you know, people kept saying, well, it's fine that you don't have affirmative action because you can deal with it through socioeconomic status. And that just wasn't true. It just wasn't true. There are a lot of poor folks, and they're not all parts of other groups. And in any case, other systemic issues are hurting some groups that have low socioeconomic status more than other groups, and so on. So the university argued, you know, before the Supreme Court more than once that that is not sufficient to deal with systemic racism. So while it's a very high value of ours and we practice it, we are not able to deal with it. So the University of California's undergraduate population, the Black population, dropped by a factor of 2 when Prop 209 was passed and never recovered. And so despite all the effort, you know, and I was clearly involved with efforts as well, but, you know, given that law and the way people treated bias asymmetrically, as I described earlier, we just couldn't do it. And so you need also affirmative action if you're going to deal with systemic racism directly, for example. But yeah, socioeconomic status that's another group that's underrepresented at very good universities.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we are almost at the end of the hour, so we will have to end the event here, but I really hope that it was both enjoyable and useful to the audience. I would like to take this opportunity to also thank very much Gibor for volunteering to give this talk. I think there's a lot to learn from him and his experience, and this is definitely a topic that we all postdocs should think carefully about and implement in our future career. So with this, again, thank you so much, Gibor, and I'll end the meeting here.
Thank
you all
you.
for listening.
Thanks, Gibor.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Very interesting.
Thank you.